We will continue now with Ellis. It is yours to present on the insights you gained from the MERLIN implementations. Ellis is already here. Yep. Good. And you don't need my assistance here.
I think I'll be fine, yes. I hope so. Otherwise, I'll come and haunt you.
Yeah. I'll be around.
Yep, thank you.
There you go.
Good morning, everyone. Super nice to see you all and to see each other in this setting. We've done so much, and I want to take you to the part of implementation and upscaling in all of your cases. And then where Lawrence has been focusing more on monitoring and on the data and how do we really understand what we're doing. I want to also talk a bit more about the process part and the work that has been done really on the implementation in the work package 2, which we did together with the lead of Tom and Nadine, and also Maria and Kaisa from 𝗥𝗲𝘀𝗂𝗊𝗲𝘀 helped with that. Now this, in a way, you've already seen a bit of it, right? Where all our cases are and that they're in different clusters. But it's quite nice because the clusters really help us to structure a bit on what we have been doing. And of course, if we're talking about like, what did we do? How many hectares did we restore? And you see here a pie chart, and you see this mainly peatland and wetlands and the transboundary river areas where we see there's a lot of the small streams where we have a lot of work in hectares being restored. But that is also because then in the other sectors, there's also the kilometers of streams that we worked on, right? So here we see that it's almost 10,000 hectares that have been restored, which is surprisingly large numbers. And that's a real good impact that we made together. And also for the kilometers, we are over 100 kilometers of rivers restored. Well, of course, Europe is looking for 25,000 kilometers, so we have some work ahead of us as well. But it's good to keep it in mind that every project brings us a step further towards that goal. And you have been working a lot on implementing these measures. And Daniel already told a bit, we've invested more than half of the budget into that implementation. And it's been a significant amount of work for many of you. And what we're also trying to do in this work package 2 is to understand how you did that. What were the things that you had to struggle with, that you had to do to make it really feasible? With whom did you work together? How did your process go? And how did you manage to do this to reach impact in your case studies? And what was that impact in your case studies? So what were you proud of? And getting those stories, because sometimes it's not really only about the data that you measure, but it's also about the stories that you tell that make that we can go further and inspire others. And I think that's something that we did really well in MERLIN as well. So what we did is we also identified 5 categories, and they will come back later on in the talk too, that are basically summing up some of these key conditions. We talk about stakeholder engagement. How do you really get the people on board to get it done? How do you get the finance going? What is your technical capacity? Can you really do this? And what are the multiple goals? The Green Deal goals we've been already talking about, and the enabling policy framework, because a framework for policy helps in getting things going. Just a few examples. I can't show all of the 18 ones, there's too many of that, but just to give you an example, in the 𝗽𝗲𝘀𝗀 we have been working on barrier removal, and here you see like the pre and post results of that. There were more dams removed, a total of 10 was planned, in the end there were 8. But also in the Danube, they've been working, and they are working and continuing working on making the shorelines much more natural, and really linking both the natural ecosystems and then also ensuring that navigation is going on. So you see here the removal of stone revetments on the riverbanks. And in all of these works, there were quite some challenges that you encountered. And we tried to ask you, like, what were these challenges, and can we cluster them in different ways so that we can understand better what your challenges are about? Is there a category of challenges that you all experience? Now, we made a clustering in what we call external, so things that just happened, administrative, technical, logistical, others, sometimes there's things that you didn't expect at all, or ecological aspects. And you see that the ecological, that was not very often. I'll show you a few examples here of what were these challenges, because the terms themselves of these categories, they are a bit vague. It's easier to see the examples themselves. So for example, with the external factors, yeah, there was a flood. Yeah, so you had planned to start working, but you just couldn't, it was too wet. But then you have to wait, but you have to replan and reschedule. But also it can be that, for example, there was quite a lengthy permitting procedure. I see some people in the room saying yes, nodding, yeah, I experienced that. But you just have to do it. That's also something that someone said. I just have to do it. I know it's part. It's also good that these permitting aspects, they are there, right? They ensure that we do the work in the right way. Sometimes we had complicated local conditions, for example, difficult to access an area that we needed to restore, so you need to fix that as well. Or like seasonal aspects, like breeding season makes that you cannot go into the field, so you have to schedule and reschedule as well. Or just plan A didn't work, and you have to really rethink how to get towards another plan. And sometimes this ecological part, but it was really only a few times that they say, oh, there's actually an unexpected shift in species, so we need to kind of change that a bit. And in general, if you would summarize it all, you had to be very flexible. And you had to keep on going, even if the going was tough. And but you all did. And I think it's a really great example to see all the drive that is behind really making the world a bit better in your areas. Now, Lawrence already talks about this, multiple benefits. It's something that MERLIN has been really addressing quite a bit. And to see this evidence on, like, are we approaching that multiple benefits part? How are we doing that? And this is, of course, the results only in the short term. But so therefore we see that some of the aspects, they say, we don't really know yet if there is a trend visible, but most of them there is at least a positive trend or already positive impact visible. And this one you also said already, that we can also look at that from the different categories. Now, because Lawrence already talked more about this, I'll go quickly on to what your lessons learned were. And we make a distinction between the points of pride and your lighthouse aspects. Now, points of pride were things we asked. We came with some of your interviews with you, like how did you perceive your case, and what were the things that you were really proud of related to your case. And we asked what's the lighthouse aspect, meaning what is so important in your case that you'll be very happy that others also know about this. They are aspects that might also very much inspire others to do a similar aspect. And you see that, like, top of the list is how you have been dealing with stakeholder engagement. It's something that was both good for you as the case, but also as an example for others to learn from and to work with. And I think the stakeholder aspect is sometimes kind of underestimated how much time it can take. I've heard people say it takes half of your project time, or even more, to do the stakeholder engagement in a proper way. So I'm really grateful to see how that effort has been going in, and also how that has helped you to have outreach and demonstration in a wider zone around your case as well. But also ecological transformation, and how you see that it has really helped you to make a step forward, and how this has also been part of upscaling and policy influence. We had, like yesterday also, we've been bringing a lot of your challenges and your stories of success to other areas where policies are being drafted. So next to that, innovation and adaptation, but also how you create knowledge and how you learn it, and how you have been collaborating across the sectors. So what we see really is, if you're talking about lessons learned coming to all of that, is that basically our projects, they have been giving us a progress forward, and they have been giving us a way to say we're proud of what we're doing, and it's something that is good to share with the people around us. And what is part of that we need to realize is that the local context can be quite important in where you come from and where you can go within the lifespan of a single project, but also to take into account what are your long-term goals. See the project as a stepping stone towards those larger term goals, and to see how you can move towards that longer term goal in a flexible and adaptive way. And if you want to know more about these aspects, have a look at the MERLIN Academy. I think there's a lot of information that you shared also there in short videos. So from going from implementation to this longer term goal further forward, and this is just some photos of all the action in the field. There's too much to talk about that, and I think that the case study talks later on will give you much more inspiration, because in the end this is all about inspiration. We've been working on saying how can we help you in making a roadmap for upscaling that freshwater ecosystem restoration. And we started off with the IUCN self-assessment to really understand and really go through all the steps and all the different criteria in the self-assessment tool from the IUCN to see how have you been implementing your nature-based solution. What was the process? Did you do the multiple goals? How were your stakeholder engagement? How were the green blue goals that you added? And then we said, okay, so you have done this implementation. And that's a really nice project, but every project, even if it's good, looking into the future, what can you even do better? There's always something that you can say, hey, I can learn from others and I can even, adapt for the future course. And from going from that gap analysis where we took a SWOT approach, saying like, okay, what are the strengths and the weaknesses, opportunities and threats around us, and how can we optimize for the next step in our process? And in that next step, again, there's 5 categories coming on. Are the multiple goals there? Are social aspects in check? What can we improve on technical aspects or on economic aspects or on policy aspects? And based on that kind of assessments and strategies, we then said, okay, our implementation plan for the short term, but the regional scalability plans, they are there for the longer term. So you see that this process of having a structured way to help you think about not only your implementation, but also about your future steps, it has been very instrumental. And this method is also now being uptaken in other EU projects to think in a similar way about how does a project run and how can we make the next step in a way that helps us to think further beyond, like perhaps the first goals that were on our mind when we started the trajectory. As an example, the Room for the Rivers project at Room for the Rhine in the Netherlands is one of those that also did one of these regional scalability plan exercises with the gap analysis and optimization. And what you see there is that if we're talking about these multiple goals, the Room for the Rhine, it was a really nice project, right? I think it's something that we in the Netherlands were very proud of. But it's really focused on flood management and natural values in the floodplain area. When it was first designed, we didn't really talk so much about droughts or navigation, and morphology was also a bit so-so. And now with this kind of new thinking, also having a new situation where climate change is also creating new challenges, there's new kind of threats or opportunities, just depending on how you say. We say that actually, if we want to optimize and working further on these types of projects, we should take into account the droughts and the navigation and the morphology. And the same goes for the right group of stakeholders. Was it engaged from the very start, or did we miss someone? So there you can also optimize and to say, should we have a broader stakeholder engagement process? And the same goes for example, the technical aspects. Do we have to still improve certain aspects of knowledge? Is there some parts that we actually should be researching a bit deeper to really say that we can to upscale the NBS and take into account more aspects of co-benefits and trade-offs. And for the economics, what are the advancements in restoration cost-benefit methods? So for this case specifically, there were different ways, and more in the financial part will come perhaps on how do you do a good multi-criteria analysis, which are the co-benefits that you take into account. And then of course, because you're working in an area, there's multiple policies in such an area. How do you combine them and how do you coordinate between them? It is something that will need our constant attention, especially also in the near future. And so when we started the whole upscaling and talking about regional scalability plans, at the start we asked you, how ready are you for this process? And we defined that upscaling to draft regional scalability plans into 3 steps to say, okay, what are your existing plans and are you ready to take a next step for scaling ahead? Are the preconditions there to start thinking about scaling up? Like, are your stakeholders in place, or what do you need to arrange for that? And what are then are you ready for implementing? And then you see there was, via the interviewing, you gave indications of how far you are from blue, it's ready, to yellow, first vague ideas, and orange, you have no idea yet. And you see that all of you, or many of you, you had some first ideas, but yeah, there were still some things to do and to further develop to really make a good scalability plan. And I think that you all depend, regardless on which cluster you were, which case study you were, there was a lot of exchange that also contributed to this cross-learning of the cases. Because if you're saying, if you want to make it into a very simple summary, were you ready? 7 of the cases were ready, but the others were still having to do quite a bit of emerging ideas, or we not at the start. Yeah, this is really a new thing for us. So coming back to the Green Deal goals, is also, as Lawrence was saying, most of you were focusing on biodiversity. And climate change mitigation was a good second one. Together with inclusivity, are all the stakeholders on board. But it did help, this whole process helped you really to also think further into, okay, what are the other factors? And are they something that we need to take into account? And sometimes, yes, they're not that relevant. It's also good to acknowledge that sometimes in your process, it's not, one of these criteria may be less relevant, but it's good to consider them. So I hear there's also in the policy brief a bit of a highlight from 4 cases to how to talk about like restoration at large scale. These are cases that really had the opportunity to do restoration at large scale, or at least have plans in place to start acting on a large scale. I already mentioned the Room for the Rhine, but also the Hampshire. In green in Denmark, there is these larger scale plans that really helps to do large scale impact, and the TISA too. And what you're seeing here in all of these highlights is that basically, if I just go back to the table, you see large time zones as well, large time horizons. If you want to do something at large scale, it's just going to take time and effort and resources. Also, human resource. Linda this morning was saying we hired 100 extra people to do the work in Denmark. So this is also green job creation, right? There's an extra tick there, but just to show you need also the capacity of people to actually start doing large-scale implementation. And that long-term commitment and local leadership is really important in that. But it's also to say that a single project is just a step in that larger, longer-term process. And I really hope that you also experience this, but I found this really important, is that this peer learning and how you've been telling stories to each other has been really instrumental in understanding your process and to understand how we can do this. And also understanding where you are, where you came from, where you started. And if you have a very, if you're in a situation where your institutional capacity is not very strong, yeah, then you're working more on smaller projects step by step. Whereas if you have a strong government support and large-scale finances for multiple years, it's much easier to do this upscaling. So if you're summing this all up, if you're talking about upscaling, ecosystem restoration, it's good to realize that often you may perceive that you're coming from individual, isolated, little restoration projects. But it's good to try to see, can we put them in that wider perspective of a larger space and time scale? And that these instruments that we've made in MERLIN, such as this gap analysis, which is helping you to have a structured method for thinking, basically, and for dialogue. Are we on the right way, or what did we miss in the current situation? How can this help that to optimize towards both the very near future, but also towards this vision for the longer time and spatial scales? And then in that upscaling, we really address a few of the different upscaling dimensions. How do you ensure that it's the right geographic scale, that you're at the right long term? What does long term mean? For some of you, when we are working on this project, your vision started now up to 2030. But 2030, it feels a bit like tomorrow. 2050 is already a generation ahead of us, but you saw that, like, for example, also Room for the Rivers is a 30-year endeavor. So you need to think in that 30 years, perhaps 50 years time steps. And the multiple goals, they will help you. The multiple goals will also bring in stakeholders that might have a different primary goal than yourself. To say that you come from a biodiversity point of view might be good for people that are also interested in biodiversity, but if you're working with people that are more interested in like the flood problems or the drought problems in an area, talking about multiple goals and how the measures can also help make you resilient to those is super important, because it's another way of getting them on the table and get a joint vision forward. And the same goes, of course, for having that talk. Having that talk from the onset onwards, not waiting and make the talk and make the plan yourself and then start talking with people, but really listening. When we see that when you was early engagement, your plans were stronger and better supported. Now, of course, the public and private funding is something that has been said before and will be said further on, so I won't go too much into that, but a plan without any ideas about financing will be a bit more challenging. So I'll leave it with this for you now. Lots of documents if you want to know more of the details. Thank you very much.